Welcome to the Momnificent Podcast. This is the place where we help parents live a happy, healthy life with their kids. We're going to show you how to connect with your child and help them even in their most difficult moments as we hear from experts in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Karin Jakubowski, an international speaker, public school principal, and former struggling student. The Momnificent Podcast equips parents with science-based strategies to help you live a happy, healthy life with your kids. Welcome. Well, I'm excited to have Gramps here on our episode today. Gramps, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So Gramps, for our audience, tell us a little bit of who you are, where you're joining us in from today, and a little bit about you.
I'm calling in from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I am the grandfather of 6 grandkids. And the book I wrote, I Don't Want to Turn 3, is a true story about the interaction of these 6 kids. So that's why I'm here.
Well, I went to Scottsdale, Arizona once. Loved it there. I cannot wait to go back. It's a beautiful city.
Oh, it's absolutely. Right now, it's a great time. It's the morning time. Go out for a walk because it's going to hit 110 today.
Yeah, but it's a dry heat, so it's a little different.
Yeah, that's true.
Just a little. It was crazy when I went to Scottsdale for a conference, and then my husband and I rented a car and we drove to the Grand Canyon. And it's crazy how many different land plateaus, different, I'm not even going to say the right word for all, like the land scenery that you go through in just a couple hours.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's great living here in Phoenix because in 2.5 hours, you go to Flagstaff, you go skiing. So it's just a great place to be.
Yeah, that was really cool. Okay, so how did you end up writing your book? Like, did your grandson, like he was just struggling with turning 3, or how did that all develop and happen?
I'll tell you, living this past year because of the pandemic caused by COVID-19, in isolation, except for being able to be with my family, gave me a special time to kind of watch and interact with all these grandkids. I got to tell you what a trip that was because all 6 of these kids have completely different personalities. And one thing they do have in common is a sense of curiosity and how excited they do get when they do accomplish something. Watch them grow year to year and how they interact with each other really is the basis for this book. What goes through a toddler's mind when the parents are so desperate to understand? When does a toddler really understand the difference between me and us? The book kind of explores how this whole family finds out this together. As a baby boomer myself, trying to understand how the world has evolved since I was 3 years old. And it's also part of the story. My parents didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cable TV. They didn't have remotes. I was my dad's remote. He said, son, go change the channel. I was his remote. So my parents' definition of discipline is quite different than the parents of today. And has this made today's world a better place to live? Well, I'll kind of just let your listeners kind of figure that one out. So that's what the book's all about.
So is it written through the lens of the child or the parent or both?
It's written through the lens of Jordan, who is the child. It's all in first person. So it's all about how he sees the world and what happens to him. Because the story is based on, he was 2 years old and he's turning 3 tomorrow. And so he's wrestling with all that. And so what he does, he interacts with all his cousins and he steals all their toys. He takes all the things from them. He piles them up in the room. And then Olivia, who was 8 at the time, discovers them. And they all find out that he's taken everything around. And so she comes up with the idea, and this is a true story because this really did happen based on what she had learned from school, that they should give all of their toys and all of his third-year gifts to the homeless kids downtown. And that's how that all comes to the end.
Oh my gosh. Well, I noticed you have one quote, and mommy looks at me like today will be my last day alive. Where did that come about?
Oh, well, let me find it in the book. Here, let me find the book here. This is the book, I Don't Want to Turn 3. So it happens, and all the pictures in the book are based on true stories. Like this is a picture that I had taken of Jackson and Levi in the bathtub, and I went to the artist and she made it into a cartoon. So, all right, that's a great quote. I'll read it to you. This is when Olivia finds the toys. Then all of a sudden, Olivia screams, "What are my dancing shoes doing in Jordan's room?" The entire family runs to my private bedroom, and Jackson yells, "My dinosaurs!" And Levi shrieks, "My sea creatures!" And Baker bawls, "Truck!" And Grace cries, "My dolls!" And Mommy looks at me like today will be my last day alive.
And how many times I just love that you're getting it through the eyes of a little kid. Like, so I'm an elementary public school principal, and years ago we had a student who stole things, and our immediate reaction was like, "Oh my gosh, they're suspended." And I just stopped because in doing these podcasts, I've listened to so many different authors, speakers, writers, and over time, one phrase stuck out to me that one of my podcast guests said that was, "Behind every behavior, there's a story." And I keep going back to that, and I was like, find out the story behind this kid. And of course, there was a whole story to it. And so when I came across your phrase, and Mommy looks at me like today will be my last day alive, it just reminded me like there's so much behind the actions of what kids do. And what was his story?
Well, his story is that it's all about me. And I'm two, and it's all about me. And then that's why he really didn't want to turn three, because he realized it's not about me anymore. I got to start sharing with my cousins. What's interesting is I've now, in the last 2 years, I've watched three of them turn three, and they all have the same attitude. This is universal. One of the cutest was, talking about discipline. One of the cutest was, I was at Grace's when she turned three a couple months ago in Austin, Texas, and she had gotten some trucks for her birthday, and her older brother Jackson, who was 4.5, they were playing with them on the ground, and all of a sudden they started fighting over them. And she looks at Jackson and she says, "I need my space." And she actually gets up and she walks over to one side of the sofa. And Jackson looks at her and he says, "I need my space too." And he walks to the other side of the sofa. Well, they didn't learn that on the internet.
Oh
They learned
no.
that from their mother, who probably at one point in time got so frustrated with both of them and said, "I need my space."
You're absolutely right. And that was actually a really smart strategy.
Exactly.
That's incredible. So how old is the 3-year-old now that you wrote the book about?
He is just turned 4.5.
Oh my gosh. And what does he say about his book?
Oh, he says he loves it. But what's cute is how they interact. Like, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, Olivia, who now is 9, grabbed the book, a couple of her cousins, and she took it and she ran underneath my desk for some reason. She didn't know I was watching, and the three of them were sitting there underneath the desk, and she was reading the book to them. And Levi says, "That's me in the bathtub," and Jackson says, "Yeah, that's me with my dinosaurs." So they got into it. So it's a great kind of a family thing that they're all interacting now, and because they know it's all a true story. They know what they did, and they know what their cousins did, and so that's what it's all about.
That is so cool. Do any of the other kids like ask you if there's going to be a book written about them?
Interesting you say that, because I'm working on my next book, which is I Don't Want to Turn Four. And Olivia came to me when she turned 9 about last month. She says, "Gramps, I got a great idea for our next book." She says, "Let's write a book. I don't want to turn 10." I said, "Why don't you want to turn 10?" She says, "Well, I'm going to have to learn to drive pretty soon." I said, "That's 7 years away. Why are you worried about having to learn how to drive?" She says, "And then I got to start thinking about picking out a college." I said, "That's 9 years away. Why are you doing that?" So, in all reality, she didn't want to turn 10, but we may not want to turn 40. That could be another book. I don't want to turn 70. There's all kinds of reasons when you look forward and you look back of what you want to do. So that's what I'm working on right now.
So but you're doing the book of how to turn 4. I don't want to turn 4.
Yes.
And which grandchild is that now?
That one is going to be based on Jackson.
Oh my gosh. That is so wild. Well, so here's a funny thing that when I was an assistant principal, I had to deal with all the behavior kids and the issues with behaviors. And one time we had a kid who just like could not just do this thing we call school, like couldn't sit down long enough, couldn't sit there and get done what the teacher wanted to do. So frustrating for the teacher who's trying to get all her 20 kids doing the same thing all day long. And so often he was in my office and just in trouble again and again and again. So one day I brought him in, and for his consequence, he had probably detention or something. And I pulled out sheets of paper and I was like, let's draw pictures of what we should be doing in first grade. And and so he would draw a picture and tell me like I should raise my hand, I should sit still. If I can't sit still, I'll ask the teacher for a break. And I ended up going into Shutterfly, taking pictures of the pages and just creating our own book. So he has a copy and I have a copy. And after that year, he never had as much difficulty in school. But it was amazing to take something so difficult for him and make something so good out of it. And it just happened to be a book.
Yeah, what's interesting is how discipline has changed over the generations. Right? When I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. Now, my parents were part of the greatest generation. This is the generation that went through the Depression. This is the generation that fought World War II and made freedom available for everyone. This is a very disciplined generation. They were fabulous. They were fabulous, but very disciplined. I mean, when I was a little kid and my brother Larry and I got in trouble, my mother would say, wait till your dad gets home. And dad would come home and he'd whip off his belt and he'd chase us around the kitchen table, and that was discipline. I mean, he had a fraternity paddle that he kept in his closet. And the one night when the parents were out, my brother and I went in and got the fraternity paddle. And we lived in Ohio and it was late fall and there was a lot of leaves on the ground. And so we went outside and we buried it in the leaves, and then it snowed the next night. And so that spring we went back to look for the paddle. It was gone. It was like a miracle to us. It was like the miracle. So, that's how my generation was brought up. I think we kind of learned from that, and we tried to bring up the next generation by talking to them and so forth. And then I noticed my kids are even better than we did, because now they go to the timeout and poor kid's stuck by himself and he's away from his friends. So what you're talking about is, discipline has evolved, and I think it's evolved for the better.
Very much so. Yeah. We were paddled when I was a kid. And yeah, I was actually a really bad kid myself. I lied, I stole, I cheated, all for a good reason. I have very good stories for all of them. But boy, did my parents spank me so hard one day. I had to take a pill to school. Most embarrassing moment of my life. I'll never forget it. And nobody can believe it. They're like, how are you an elementary school principal? You're such a bad kid. I was like, cuz what we do as a kid doesn't have to define who we become the rest of our life, which is why I have such a positive approach to discipline to this day, because I was that kid. I know how that felt.
You think about it, these memories that are created, and one of my missions is to get grandparents more involved in the raising of their kids, because think about all these memories you have. That's a great memory, but you have bad memories and good memories, and I am convinced that this generation that is coming up is the greatest generation this country's ever produced. I mean, as soon as they come out of the womb, they're on the internet. They've got they learn how the cell phones, they do the internet, they've got their own computers. I didn't get involved in the internet until I was 40 years old. So, it's a whole different generation. They've got this great basis of learning, and they're going to be so much smarter than we ever were. But what we need to do as family is we've got to balance that. And we have got to get them involved in other things besides the internet. And that's where grandparents have to come involved. They have to get back involved with their kids. They've got to create those memories. I'm sure you can think of things that your grandparents did for you. You have great memories of some of that stuff. Maybe some not so bad ones, but you got great memories. And we all create that. And so that's why we've got to get grandparents more involved and back into their kids' lives, because we've got to balance out all the electronic things they're learning to bring them to be normal kids.
So why is it that you say that it seems like grandparents just don't care?
Interestingly enough, there's a 30% of grandparents are considered remote. Okay, remote, it's often quoted by the different things around the world, but that's when you think about it, that's 1 out of 3 grandparents. These are grandparents that don't get involved with their kids. They may see them or call them on their birthday. They may come see them or call them on Thanksgiving, but that's it. They figured, hey, I raised my kids. I raised them the best way they can. They're going to be great parents. I don't need to get involved. I don't know more about it's the me generation. I want to do that. So those are the ones we got to talk to get involved with them. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, why grandparents become remote. I mean, they do it sometime with the kids. They go and try to give the kids unsolicited advice, and the kids don't like that advice, so that kind of makes them remote. They may stop in the family, the kids' house unannounced. The kids don't like that. That makes them so. There's all kinds of reasons that the grandparents become remote. They undermine the parent's authority by challenging what a parent is teaching their kids. No, our kids don't want that to happen. They tend to play favorites with siblings and manipulate them. That's why they become remote. They think they can buy the kids by gifts and vacations and money and things like that. Don't have an empathy for the kids. They don't understand what their kids are going through. So, and a lot of grandparents that say, grandchild, you got to respect me or else. So these are all reasons that these grandparents become remote. On top of one, just not wanting to care. So, but again, when you think about it, again, going back to, we just got through COVID. I mean, 16% of the population is over 65, but 75% of the deaths were people over 65. So when you think about it, we're dropping right and left. The average lifespan of an American dropped 2 years over the last couple of years because of COVID added to everything else that we're dying. So we have to take advantage of being here today because we may be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it, that's why grandparents have got to get involved. We've got to help influence and bring up this greatest generation so they're well-rounded and become the greatest generation we've ever produced.
So maybe there's a grandparent listening to this right now, and maybe they have identified with one of the reasons that you mentioned. What would you say to them to help them in a first step towards being more involved?
Keep in mind that in today's world, it takes a village to raise a kid. Right? And that's especially true in single family households, or there's all kinds of reasons. So to raise a child, it takes the mom and the dad, it takes the uncles, and it takes the cousins. Obviously, it takes the teachers and the schools, but it also takes the grandparents. What happens when you're a grandparent, you do get smarter as you get older. And the reason you get smarter is because you make more mistakes and you learn from them. So decade after decade, you're making more mistakes, but you're getting smarter. And you've got to be able to share that wisdom with the younger generations of what you have learned to save them some grief, possibly. So keep in mind that any of these grandparents that say, I don't get involved, you're part of the village. These kids need you. They're learning so much electronically. They need to learn everything else, that's involved with life, and get involved.
And what would you say? I hear parents say quite often, my child is, and I'll put this in my own words, addicted to their technology. They're addicted to the device, the games, I can't get them interested in anything else. And they have no motivation when it comes to other things. What do you say? What are your thoughts on that?
Don't ever lose sight that you as a parent are the role model. So if your child sees you on your phone all the time, that's how they're going to act. You are the one that creates, the image of what life is about. So you've got to disconnect so that you can teach your kids to disconnect. Now, the best way to do that, and this is for parents and for grandparents, is you got to get your kids involved in reading books and reading to them in books. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to reading a book. I'm going to look at it from a grandparent standpoint. So I've got my grandchild, 2, 3, 4 years old. We let them pick out the book because it's important for them to be important. Everybody's got 20 books or so around their house. There's 100 great books. I want them to buy my book, but there's other books out there to read too. And so you got the child. He comes, sits on your lap. They pull the book together. The first thing that happens is it creates a bonding experience. It's a nice way just to spend 20 minutes together. You're reading a book. They're sitting on your lap. You get a chance to really to just be together. Another reason why we need to be reading books to our children at a very early age is it supports listening skills. Now, you and I both know as adults that listening skills are the best skills we have. Obviously in your school environment, you've got to listen before you can react. If you're in sales, you got to listen before you can sell. Listening is just such an important skill. And if you can develop that early on by reading books and having them, that requires them to listen, then that's a great way to break the mold. Another reason we should be reading books to kids is it helps with the cognitive and language development. There's plenty of words in these books these kids don't understand, so you have a chance to explain them. There's plenty of words I don't understand. I got to look up. But that gives you that opportunity as you're sitting there for those 20 minutes to explore all the cognitive and language development. And another reason is attention span. 2, 3, 4, they bounce off the wall all day. Get them in your lap for 20 minutes. You give them a chance to concentrate, self-discipline, and these are skills that they can use as they grow and get into adulthood.
Absolutely. And the skills we see kids need and are lacking more and more of, actually. So we can help that by doing that one simple step of just reading to your child. There's so much happening in those moments together.
Well, the other sad thing that's been caused by this pandemic is the kids are reading less. The United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, they say 584 million children worldwide are experiencing reading difficulties now. That compares to 460 million before the pandemic. That's a rise of 20% more kids today than 2 years ago are having reading difficulties. That wipes out 2 decades of educational gains. The Stanford Graduate School of Education released a study reporting that second and third graders' reading fluency is now 30% behind what would be expected in a typical year. And so they need the reading fluency now so that they can read on their own as they get later. That's another reason we all have to get involved. This pandemic has caused a loss of reading, and we just got to force the issue.
Right, because our future's at stake, because now we have to make up the years that they've lost, which puts everything behind where we actually needed to be doing more anyway to get us ahead on the forefront, creative, developing new inventions, etc. So how many kids do you have?
I've got 4 kids and 6 grandkids.
And you live in Arizona, so where do they live?
Well, they live in, I've got 2 of them living here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I've got 2 in Austin, Texas, and 2 in Orlando, Florida. Now, the key is, how do you keep in touch with that? When I grew up, my uncle lived up the street. My grandmother lived 2 blocks away. And so that was our village. It was there. But now the village is scattered, unfortunately. And so how do you keep involved, and how do you keep them in reacting with you? Well, I'll tell you what we did, and I'm sure your listeners can come up with other stories. So, during the pandemic, I had them all here at our house for about 6 weeks. So they all had, that's how this book was based on, is what they were interacting with each other. So they got very familiar with our house. But one thing that I really learned is the language of little kids 2, 3, 4, and 5, and even I saw it with my 7-year-old yesterday, is dinosaurs. They love dinosaurs. That's their language. If they go in to meet somebody new, that's one of the first subjects they talk about is dinosaurs. Now they can name all these long named dinosaurs when they're 2 and 3 years old. All I know are they're small, medium, and large, but they can tell me who eats meat. They can tell me. So this is their language. They love dinosaurs. So when they all left, we figured, how are we going to keep in touch with our kids in Texas and Florida? And so we figured, well, we're going to take our 6 dinosaurs we have here in the house, and we're going to put them someplace different every night. So What we did was, like, for instance, the dinosaurs were in the refrigerator eating blueberries one night. Another night, the dinosaurs were by the sink with grandma washing dishes and they had snow, soap on their noses. Another night they were playing the piano. Another night they were walking up the steps. So we had 50 different adventures inside and outside of our house for the dinosaurs. So what happened is we became part of the routine of all these kids. They would take their bath, the parents would read them a book, and then they say, "What are the dinosaurs doing tonight?" So they would get on I'll call my wife's iPhone, and we would get on FaceTime, and they say, "Where's Gramps? Where's Gramps? What are the dinosaurs doing tonight?" So that gave us a chance to stay in touch and be with these kids. And I'm sure your listeners can come up with other stories too. But it's important because little kids aren't going to call you, out of sight, out of mind. So you've got to make an effort to be part of their lives.
Yeah, and find what interests them and how can you use that, because it could be different than what we think would be interesting to them. I love that story. That's the best idea. That is so cute. You could turn that into a book one day.
Find the dinosaur.
That's such a fun activity. All right, Gramps. So I love everything that you just shared, and I think it will really help even one listener listening out there today. And what's one thing you can leave us with today?
At what age do we begin to take responsibility for our actions? Is it 3 years old? Is it 13 years old? Is it 23 years old? I've got plenty of contemporaries at 63 that still don't take responsibility for their actions. So how can we get our kids to start taking responsibility for their actions? That's very important.
Yeah. And I mean, just being a principal where I am, and kids are, the general population of the kids do well and the whole system works for them. So it's not like I get to have these individual conversations with each kid, but when I do, and then usually it's with the ones that have issues, it's like there's so much in there. And if we just like stop and listen to them, that's what you did. You just listened to that they love the dinosaurs and you connected to something. You just listened and you came out with this book. You just listened. So I love, where can someone find and follow you to find your books?
Oh, you can find my books on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, about 100 other sites, or come to my site, grampsjeffrey.com. Or if any of your listeners want to continue the conversations, please email me. It's grampsjeffrey@gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much, Gramps. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hey there, it's Karin. I hope that you're enjoying the show. And by the way, if you're a mom who wants to learn how to help your child when they're struggling behaviorally or facing challenges in school, get started today by getting my free short video course, 3 Steps to Happy Healthy Kids, at www.educationalimpactacademy.com/free video. If you're new here or you haven't done this yet, this is definitely the first step to get started in learning how to have a happy, healthy life with your kids. So head on over to www.educationalimpactacademy.com/free video and grab your free gift today. Well, that's all we've got for this episode of the Momnificent Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be honored if you would subscribe and rate if you really liked it. I know wherever you're listening right now, it might not be the best time to leave a comment, but feel free to leave a question, a review, or a comment at any time. And until next time, remember, don't worry, be happy.